We've spent quite a bit of time talking about the Jets head coaching search, knowing that they were very much in on Barry Trotz. They were being patient. They were waiting it out. He was clearly their number one choice. Unfortunately for the Winnipeg Jets and many fans were quite excited about it, that is not happening. What did you make of the decision by Barry, and where does that leave the Winnipeg Jets going into this week and less than 2 weeks away from making selections in Montreal?
Yeah, I mean, I think this was a possibility right from the get-go, right? When Barry Trotz was, let go from the New York Islanders, everyone knew he still had one more year left on that deal, which means he'd get paid whether he sat on his hands or was behind a bench. And so understanding that, that was certainly a possibility. It became pretty clear over time that that was kind of his top priority was, almost was he needed to be convinced to coach again because of the chance to, really sit out a year and do all the things he hasn't done. I forget what he said, but it was something like 26 years or something coaching straight. That number might even be low. But and when you're a coach, you don't get a ton of your off season, off. You're always kind of planning for next year, especially if the year didn't go as planned. And as we know, only one team really, really goes that direction. So, but as time went on, as you mentioned, Huss, I think it was clear that Winnipeg kind of came Winnipeg or bust. We talked last week. The terms of that contract, everything that he wanted, he was given. It was just deciding on whether or not he was willing to take it. And, again, I think there's indicators there, when Vegas moved on, when Philly moved on, I think those are organizations that weren't willing to, quote unquote, wait it out. I think the Jets were certainly were willing to wait it out. From what I understand, they had several meetings, went back and forth, quite a bit, changed the deals and really accommodated Barry Trotz in the event that he was ready to take on what would be, a significant role here with the Winnipeg Jets. And, again, as Vegas and other Philly and other places filled their coaching roles, the Jets were still willing to wait. And I think, as we heard more and more reports come out about when he was going to make the decision, I think Barry Trotz realized, look, I can't be holding on to this. And when I'm really not convinced I'm going to coach. And so he let the Jets know before that Canada Day deadline that we kept hearing about. And I think that was, the right thing to do. If you need 4 more days to convince yourself, chances are, you don't really want it right now. But I'm sure it was a tough decision. I'm sure True North, threw everything at him and really, really did have a hard push. But at the end of the day, he chose his family and he chose, taking that year off and rethinking things for next season. As far as the Winnipeg Jets, the new search continues. I mean, the Jets didn't sit on their hands and not reach out to teams. They didn't go full throttle into second interviews, but they certainly had a couple first interviews, a few first interviews, certainly reached out to other, potential prospects. And now that Barry Trotz is off the board, I think that's going to heat up. I'd go as far as beginning today. I think, you're going to look at second interviews for guys like Jim Montgomery, Rick Tocchet, guys who were kind of in the mix before, the Jets probably have reached out to Kirk Muller, wherever that might go. We'll see. But I think there's a long list there, and it'll be fascinating to see which direction the Jets go in, whether that's a more experienced coach or go a different way and maybe someone who's less, I don't want to say qualified, but less experienced as a main bench boss.
Well, I mean, with all the uncertainty about what happens going forward, and I think a lot of things really were on hold until the Trotz question was answered, and now they have that. I'm really interested as to how that might affect what they do going forward. I mean, Remus and I were talking about it, and I'm looking at the roster. You look at the team, the players that are signed, and a number of the forwards particularly are signed. We've been hearing potentially mentioned in trade rumors. And do you think, Jeff, that the fact that Barry Trotz is not coming, and I think the hope would be that you'd have a Hall of Fame coach like that coming in that would be able to very quickly get the team back on track, much like he did in the Island. If you don't have a guy with that proven resume, and you're talking about potentially moving a Blake Wheeler, moving a Mark Scheifele, the Pierre-Luc Dubois news that we've come that, will potentially force the Jets into making a deal at some point, albeit not right now. Might we see even more player movement and some more significant moves and maybe players that we haven't been talking about now because of essentially a window changing, getting more active in the draft? And maybe kicking this can down the road a little bit. I'm certainly not suggesting they're going to blow it up or try to tank, but might the path change a little bit because of what we learned on Friday?
I don't know, Huss, if it necessarily changes. I thought that if Barry Trotz came in, that would have resulted in change. Change doesn't mean,
It's a good point.
blowing things up and starting over with. I don't think that's the Jets. That's not the Jets' plan. Like, I mean, that can't be the Jets' plan. They don't have a team that warrants a rebuild, or warrants, blowing things up or sending guys away. Now, if the right offers were to come for the right players, and whether that meant, moving into a higher draft pick, and when I say higher draft pick, I mean within the top 5, yeah, those deals might become enticing looking towards the future. I mean, we know the Jets need help in the back end, even with the changes they made over last summer. Defense has remained an issue. Under Trotz, I think there would have been, I'd go so far as to suggest perhaps dramatic change with the team just to fit his coaching style. Now, I think with other coaches, whether that, be, or anyone else really besides Barry Trotz, I think the Jets were looking for plans or visions that involved everyone that they have. Where we get into some interesting things, and I think this has nothing to do with the coach, whoever the coach might be. I think it has everything to do with the players, is the Jets' hand might be getting forced here with a couple, unhappy campers, whether that be, Mark Scheifele, whether that, we've heard reports that Pierre-Luc Dubois has told the Jets that he wants to, test free agency in a couple seasons. I mean, those kind of things, if you're sitting on, if you're sitting on potential ticking time bombs and you don't know how you're going to convince that player to stick around beyond, in PLD's case, two more seasons, then I think I think other teams are also looking into that. And so your opportunity might be coming knocking just based on other teams coming to you rather than being proactive. I think the Jets might find themselves in situations to be reactive, depending on what teams call them and depending on what pieces they're willing to part with. We know that, the Jets have a lot of talented players, whether that's Mark Scheifele, whether that's Pierre-Luc Dubois, whether that's guys like Nick Ehlers. And, I mean, there's a lot of players on this team that other clubs would covet and potentially give big pieces back. So, it might not be a thing where the Jets are going, okay, we need to change everything up. It might be a situation where the Jets look at their options and just know that they need to build a bit of a different culture and be a different roster, particularly when it comes around building up, their defense. And so, we talked about, or we have talked about, and we've heard reports on some of the players that, are disgruntled or are coming off tough seasons. I think there's more people in that group that just haven't been reported. I'd be curious to know what other players are thinking, outside of, the Mark Scheifele's and the Pierre-Luc Dubois and guys that we've, already read reports on, what other players are thinking as far as, their futures and what opportunities could come, for the Jets, in that regard. But, ultimately boils down to, and we've been saying this for months, is that this is going to be an incredibly fascinating offseason. And the reality is it's been based on, a coach that is not coming anymore. So now, you need to get that guy in place. You have the draft coming up here in a couple weeks. There's lots to happen, and there's lots of pieces that you want to put in place. So I expect this search for the next, for the next head coach to happen fairly quickly and get somebody in there, so you can start giving not only getting some answers for what your future looks like, but also giving some answers to some players on that roster that are probably wondering, who's going to be behind the bench next season.
No doubt about it. Hey, just quickly before we continue, great crowd in here. I know a lot of you are new and maybe have found us recently. Make sure you hit that red subscribe button and join us each and every day here at 1 p.m. live. And of course, you can watch it anytime, but if you have the subscription, certainly helps us grow the channel. And when you hit YouTube, you'll have the latest content from Winnipeg Sports Talk ready and waiting for you. Let's get back to the coaching because that is the story this week as to where they go from here. As we sit here on Monday, coming out of the weekend with the Trotz news on Friday, if you had to give there we go, the Trotz, just Jets head coach watch now on Winnipeg Sports Talk. Do you have a front runner right now? I mean, if you had to narrow it down to the most likely candidates from what you're hearing, I mean, who would be 1, 2, 3 on your list right now, Jeff?
1, 2, 3 on my list would be Who I would like to see as coach of the Jets, who I think the Jets are going to get are a bit different. Who I think the Jets, will end up with. I think the list of three includes Jim Montgomery, Rick Tocchet, and I would almost say, like a Pascal Vincent / Scott Arniel as a shared third spot. I said on the show weeks ago that I think Kirk Muller could do wonders for this team, particularly when it comes to developing the centermen to play a better game. We saw what happened in Calgary, and what I've been told is Kirk Muller was a big piece of that. I've also been told that Kirk Muller might be the next option for the Flames when Daryl Sutter moves on. But head coaching job opportunities don't happen all that often for guys that don't have necessarily large resumes. I'm not saying Kirk Muller couldn't get another job in a year or two, but you also kind of want to jump on those opportunities as well. So, but I don't know. I think there's interest there. I just don't know if that will be it. I do think it's going to come down to Jim Montgomery, Rick Tocchet, or a guy that they know, whether that be Scott Arniel, Pascal Vincent. I don't think Alain Vigneault is necessarily in that group, but just people with that connections. I don't know if they're necessarily pushing for that, but I do think there's a couple quality names there at one or two that I think could certainly come in and bring that experience and bring that resume to be a winner.
Listen, just before we go, we mentioned a bunch of names. The one name that we didn't mention is Andrew Brunette. And Brunette is fascinating for so many reasons in that he's got a very limited resume. He's coached for the majority of one season. This past season, Jack Adams finalist with the Florida Panthers. Do you think that's a possibility? Because I can tell you from a media side of things, I mean, it couldn't get any juicier than essentially just swapping Maurice and Brunette and seeing what happens with the two teams.
Well, yeah, definitely. I mean, I almost have to apologize for not bringing him up. I think he would be in that group. But he, if it was in the group of people who the Jets should go after, yeah, absolutely, he cracks that top three. I don't know if he, here's the thing: if you're Andrew Brunette, look, you garnered a reputation. You mentioned, Huss, his lack of head coaching resume. I'm not 100% sure that Andrew Brunette would want to walk into the situation he was just in and go to a team that, for argument's sake, is pretty much trending the exact opposite way. And so, because you can kind of, as much as you can make a reputation in a small amount of time, you can also break a reputation in a small amount of time. So, if you're the Winnipeg Jets, I certainly think you're looking for a guy like Andrew Brunette to come in and bring his winning abilities to your team. I'm just curious of what Brunette might think about coming to Winnipeg, where he might have a ton of questions with the roster. Now, who knows? Maybe he sees a roster that he, sees it as a challenge and wants to come jump in. I think he's certainly, be given the opportunity. I don't mean offered the job per se, but certainly be in the running. I don't know why he wouldn't be. But this one, to me, and it's just my own opinion, of course, is that I think it's, it's going to be an interesting one to see if he wants the opportunity here in Winnipeg rather than, I'm sure there's going to be a couple teams that are looking for his services.